Hi everybody. We're going to do things a little differently today. We're going to talk about David's son Samuel. So we'll just do a quick little review. The beginning of the nation of Israel, God made a promise with Abraham that out of him would come a great nation and they would be a blessing to the whole world. So Abraham had a son named Isaac, the promised son, the miracle, and then there was Jacob. His brother Esau went off his own way and did not follow God. So Jacob had 12 sons, out of which came the 12 tribes of Israel, including Joseph there. Then they went to Egypt during a famine, and they stayed there for so many years they became a great nation. They had to leave Egypt. God chose Moses to lead them out of Egypt. Then they got to the promised land and there was a series of judges. Then the last judge, Samuel, crowned Saul, the first king of Israel. Then there was David, the second king of Israel. And then there was Solomon, the third king in Israel. Okay. Let me see here. Lots of stuff. Okay. So, I can't see my writing on the back of this. Let's see. So in 1 Chronicles chapter 28 and verse 9, we have something that David said to his son Solomon before David died. He wanted to give him a little bit of wisdom before he died. And this is what he said. And thou, Solomon, my son, know thou the God of thy father, and serve him with a perfect heart and with a willing mind, for the Lord searches all the hearts and understands all the imagination of the thoughts. If you seek him, he will be found by you, but if you forsake him, he will cast you off forever. So this was a blessing and a warning that David was giving to his son. He was trying to help him out to be a good king. Okay, well, Solomon did love the Lord, and he walked in all the statutes of his father David. He, after David died, Solomon went to do 1,000 burnt offerings to the Lord, and that night he went to sleep and he had a dream. And the Lord himself appeared to Solomon in the dream. And he said to him, ask what I shall give you. Well, this was a wonderful thing. Ask what I shall give you. Solomon could have asked for anything. But remember, he was following in the steps of his father David. And he loved God with all his heart. And he was quite young at the time, he said, O Lord, I am but a little child in the midst of this great nation. All of these people, your chosen people who you love. How can I lead such a great nation? I'm just a little kid. I feel so small and insignificant. I don't know what to do. And I would like to be a good leader for them. So what I ask is that you will help me. Well, God was very pleased with what Solomon had requested. He said, because you did not ask for riches and for honor, for fame, for horses, because you did not ask for those, I'm going to give them to you anyways. And because you asked for wisdom, which is what I'd really like to give you anyways, for the sake of my people Israel who I love, I am going to give you more wisdom than anyone who ever lived before you ever had, and more wisdom than anyone that ever lives after you will ever have. Because God wanted Solomon to be a good king to his people, the nation of Israel, who he loved. So he also said something similar to what David had said to Solomon before he died. He said, I have given you what you haven't asked for as well, riches and honor, so much there will never be another king like you. And if, in the Bible, God uses this a lot. He will say, if you do this, then this will happen, or then I will do that. So he does this here. He says, if you will obey me and walk in my ways, then I will even give you a long life. I will lengthen your days. Well, Solomon woke up and he offered many more burnt offerings to the Lord in thankfulness for God's promises to him, and remember, to his father David, when he had promised David that someone from his line would sit on the throne of Israel forever. Okay, so Solomon is starting him out. This is good. Okay. Well, the Bible gives an example, a specific example of Solomon's wisdom. What happened after this, on one particular day, as Solomon was judging the people, they would come to him and ask for help with their problems, and he would help them sort out their problems. And one thing that happened, you may have heard this before, 2 women came to Solomon one day, and they were carrying one baby. And one of the women spoke up and said, "This is what happened. We both live in the same house, just the 2 of us together. No one else is there. We both were going to have a baby. I had my baby first, and 3 days later, this other lady had her baby. Well, after she had her baby, she went to sleep that night, and she woke up in the middle of the night, and her baby was dead. And she did not want a dead baby, so she came over to me where I was sleeping, and she gave the dead baby to me, put it in my arms, and took my living baby and went back to bed. So when I woke up the next morning, I looked, and my baby was dead. But then as the light got brighter, I looked, and I saw this was not my baby. But it was just she and I in the house. There was no one else there, so there's no proof." And the other lady said, "That is not true. I didn't do that. This has always been my baby. She's the one that woke up and her baby was dead. Well, I'm sorry for her, but this is my baby and I'm going to keep it." So Solomon looked at these 2 women and he said, "Soldier, bring a sword." And so the soldier went and he brought a sword, and Solomon, seemingly heartlessly, said, "Cut the baby in 2. Give half to this lady and half to this lady and send them away." And so the soldier went to get the baby, and the first lady said, "No, no, no, no." She said, "No, give the baby to the other woman. It's okay. Let her have it. Don't kill the baby. Whatever you do, don't kill it." And the other lady said, "Go ahead. Cut the baby in 2. Then neither of us will have the baby." And Solomon said, "Stop. Don't do anything to the baby. Give the baby to this woman because it's her baby, because she did not want to see the baby die. She would rather see somebody else take care of the baby." And so on that day, everyone knew the wisdom of Solomon. And this story was told everywhere. People all overheard it, and they all were amazed by the wisdom of their king. Well, after this, God did what he had promised. You remember that David had been a king of war, and God had blessed him in winning many battles and great victories, but he was a man of war, so he could not build the temple of the Lord like he had planned. He could only collect the things, and God told him how to build it, but he wasn't allowed to build it because he was a man of war. God promised his son Solomon could build the temple because he would be a king of peace, and God gave him peace so that this could happen. Now the temple has since been knocked down, so we don't have pictures of the actual temple. But the Bible is very specific. There's chapters and chapters talking about how the temple was to be built and how it was built and what it looked like. And so some people have tried to draw pictures and make models of what it may have looked like. So here's one I found on the internet. I don't know if you can see it. You can see it's very large. This is just one of the things for the temple that was outside in the courtyard, and you can see the size of the people next to it, how tiny they would have been. The temple, the actual temple inside where the priests had the showbread and the incense and the candlesticks, it was quite small relatively compared to the size of the overall temple, because God had already given dimensions in the commandments to the Israelites during the building of the tabernacle. But there was a lot of people in Israel, and Solomon wanted them all to be able to come and worship. And so the courtyard of the temple was very, very, very large. So here is an idea of what that may have looked like. I have a few more because we don't really know. So here's a few of them for you to see how big, and it was fancy. Let me tell you how fancy it would have been, because Solomon and David wanted to honor the Lord by making it as beautiful as humanly possible. So it was big and it was beautiful. Now this, you might not see very well. It's like a cutaway piece of what it would have looked like inside the temple, probably. The Bible specifically describes it as being completely overlaid with gold. So I've used a highlighter. I don't have a color printer. Don't know if you can see this very well, but like the entire Holy of Holies, there was cherubim that reached probably to the ceiling. They were so big. And all the walls and the floors, they were all covered with solid gold. So David had collected many things before he died. He had actually asked the people of Israel if they were interested in sharing things they owned to give to the temple. And so people did that. They would give their family jewels. They would give diamonds and sapphires, emeralds, anything they owned that they wanted to give to the Lord. They gave to David to be used in the building of the temple. So it was fabulous. Well, it took Solomon 7 years to build this temple. He had the help of a friend of his father David. He was Hiram, king of Tyre, and this king was very wealthy. He was able to get large amounts of gold. He had a navy to go to other lands and get things there. He had a forest of cedar trees, which were very large, expensive trees that would be used for carving the beautiful things and then overlaying with gold for the temple. They had stones that were hand shaped and transported and fit perfectly together. There was no sound of like a hammer at the building site of the temple, because it was all made by specialty people. The best would do their work off site, and then they would bring it there and just put it together. And the stones fit perfectly together. The Bible says they were extremely expensive. Remember, all that gold overlay in the temple, gold was a symbol of holiness. God is holy, and so that was a symbol of that. And then outside, like that big thing with the oxen underneath that you saw in the first picture, that was made of brass, and brass was a symbol of judgment, because God is holy and he is a judge. And so they used those two different materials in the building of the temple. They brought in the Ark of the Covenant, remember that, from the Holy of Holies, and they put that into a special room called the Holy of Holies with doors that closed in, and it was shut off from the rest of the temple. The high priest couldn't go in there just whenever he wanted, because that was special. And the actual temple itself, the people couldn't randomly wander in and out. They weren't supposed to be in there either. The priests would do all the things with the lampstand and lighting the incense and the table of shewbread. The priests would take care of all that. Remember, the tribe of Levi was set aside to do that job. Well, when it was all done, after 7 years, I believe I said, yes, after 7 years, when that was all done, Solomon called the people of Israel to come to the temple to see it and to glorify God and to worship him and to talk to them. So they all gathered, and Solomon prayed. He dedicated the temple to the Lord. He asked the Lord to hear their prayers when they prayed in it or even facing it towards it. He asked the Lord to hear the prayers of any heathen person who was not an Israelite, who didn't worship God. If they came and they prayed to God at the temple, Solomon asked God to hear their prayers so that they would go home and know that there was a God in heaven who was powerful and could hear their prayers. And so he asked for that. He reminded the people of where they had come from, how God had brought them through the wilderness to their own promised land. He reminded them of all the things God had done for them. He prayed himself. This king, this great king, kneeled down on the ground in front of all the people, and he prayed. He humbled himself. And then when he rose up, he stood up and he put his hands in the air and he glorified God. And then they did many, many sacrifices the way God had asked them to worship him. He followed all the protocol, all the things God had said. Well, when that was all done, the glory of the Lord came down from heaven like a cloud, and it filled the whole temple. It was so filled in the temple with this cloud, the glory of God, that the priests had to leave and come out. They had to come out away from that, and the people were all amazed, and they all worshiped God, and they praised God for a good king, and they praised him for the temple where they could come and worship him. They were so happy. Well, God gave them peace for a while. The Bible says they went home and they were eating and they were drinking and they were making merry. They were able to just kind of have a bit of a relaxing life. It wasn't full of wars and wondering when the enemy was going to come in and attack them, when their sons would have to go off to battle. They were able to live at peace. Well, let's see now. After the temple was dedicated by Solomon, the Lord did something wonderful. He appeared to Solomon again, twice. The Lord did not appear to very many people, but he appeared to Solomon twice. So on this second time, he appeared to Solomon. He said, I have heard your prayer. Remember when Solomon asked the Lord to hear the prayers of the people when they prayed towards the temple and to listen to the prayer of someone from another country and things like that. He came to Solomon. He said, I've heard your prayer and I have answered it. It will be as you have asked. And then he did his if then again. He said, I have heard your prayer. I have blessed this house that you have made, and I have made it holy. Now, if you follow me, then your kingdom will continue. But if you worship other gods, then the Israelites will be torn out of this land and sent somewhere else. And everyone who passes by this big, beautiful building that you have made for me, they're going to look at it and say, why is that big, beautiful building empty? There's nobody here. What's going on? And they will be told it's because that was made for the God of heaven. And the people that worshipped him stopped worshiping him, and they worshipped other gods. And so they have been cast away. And so that will be a sign to all the people round about that I will not allow people to worship other gods, that I am holy and I am mighty. So that was what God said to Solomon when he came to him the second time. So time went on, and the fame of Solomon went through all the world, the entire world. Everywhere people lived at that time, they were hearing about this great King Solomon in his palace of gold, in his temple of gold, and they heard of his riches because he was getting really wealthy. And they heard of his peace, and they heard of his wisdom, and they would tell these tales all around the world. And so one lady in particular came to visit him. Her name was the Queen of Sheba. She was a rich and powerful woman herself, and she had heard these stories, and she thought, I don't know if that's true. That would be interesting if it were. And so I'm going to go and see if it's true with my own eyes and hear with my own ears this man's wisdom and see if this could possibly be for real. And so the Queen of Sheba traveled to visit King Solomon, and she brought many people. She brought camels and spices. Back then, you had to go halfway around the world to get spices at risk of your very life. You had to go all the way to Asia through territories with bandits and mountains and freezing and burning heat. And it was pretty spectacular journey to get these spices. So they were very, very expensive. So she came with many people and camels and spices. She brought much gold and precious stones. So like diamonds and rubies and emeralds and sapphires and beryl and all kinds of beautiful precious stones. And she came to see Solomon, and they talked a long time. He spent all the time she wanted. He talked with her. She had a pile of questions, and he answered every single one of them. And he showed her the temple and his palace and how he organized his kingdom and all that sort of thing. And by the time they were done, she said, I didn't even hear half of your wisdom and your majesty. This has been just amazing. And so she gave him all those wonderful things that she had come with, the gold and the gems and all these gifts she gave to him. And then Solomon gave her gifts. I guess that was the thing to do back then. You traded gifts when you visited a king. And then she went home and brought all of the things that she had learned with her and told more tales about Solomon. He became so famous that people would come from all over the world, not just the Queen of Sheba. There were all kinds of people, rich people came from all over the world to come see him, and they would bring him gifts of gold and spices and clothing and horses and mules and armor, all these things. In fact, Solomon got so rich that the Bible says silver was like nothing back then. It wasn't counted to be even valuable at all. Gold was so plentiful, it was the only thing that was worth anything metal-wise. And the silver was just like stones in the street. That's how much there was of it lying around. So he was super duper rich, and he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen. He actually had to build cities to put these in. He had so many. So God had really, really blessed Solomon, but there was a problem. You see, Solomon, he had a fatal flaw. He loved women. He loved women too much. Now, when he first became the king, he married the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt. So that was a pretty big deal. It was like probably a bit of a business arrangement because now he had Pharaoh on his side. Pharaoh wasn't going to come and attack him. His daughter was married to him. So that worked out quite well for him politically. But he loved women so much that he had 1,000 women that he treated like his wife. Some of them were his official wives, some of them not so much. But there was 1,000 of them. Just try to wrap your head around that. There's 365 days in a year. How would he even see them all in a year? Obviously, that wasn't happening. So this was a problem. And the main problem was his wives were not godly Israelite women. Not only did he marry an Egyptian who would not have worshipped God, but he married women that were Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonites, and Hittites, and they worshipped all the gods of the people who used to live in the Promised Land. Remember why those people were kicked out of the Promised Land and God had the Israelites to make war on those people? because they were so wicked. The gods they worshipped, the idols they worshipped were awful. The things they did in their ceremonies and everything was so sinful and wicked that it was like a stench in God's nostrils, and he had to get rid of it. And so here was Solomon, God's chosen king of Israel, and he was starting to worship these gods. He even built altars and places to worship the gods for his wives, and he joined them eventually in worshiping these gods. Well, God was very angry, as you can imagine, after all the things God had done for Solomon. And he felt bad. God did feel bad because Solomon's father was David. God had made promises to David. And God loved David because of the way he followed God with all his heart. Yes, he had sinned, but he repented and he did try to follow God with all his heart. And so here was Solomon, who started so well and had so much given to him, and he was ending terribly. So God sent a message to Solomon. He said, I appeared to you 2 times. I specifically commanded you not to go after other gods, but you didn't listen. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. For your father David's sake, I will not do it during your life. And because I love Jerusalem, the people of Israel and the city of Jerusalem, I won't take away Judah from your son. I will let your son have that. I won't do it during your days, but I will do it during your son's days. He will have Jerusalem and the city and the tribe of Judah, but the 10 tribes will be torn away from him and given to your servant. And there was nothing could be done. Well, also, because of Solomon's sin, God took away the peace. He rose up, he made 2 enemies rise up against Solomon to bother him for the rest of his days. And then Solomon had a mighty man of valor, a mighty courageous man of war named Jeroboam, who was his servant, who worked for him, who was in charge of a city, I believe it was. And God sent a prophet to Jeroboam to tell him that he would be the one to get the 10 tribes away from Solomon's family. Well, after that happened, Jeroboam had to run away from Israel, run away from Solomon, because Solomon tried to kill him. He didn't want that to happen. Well, Solomon ruled for 40 years. Remember, 40 is the number of judgment. It occurs many times in the Bible. There's many symbolic numbers. And it was the same number of years that his father David had ruled, 40 years. And then his son Rehoboam came to the throne. So we will find out more about what happens next week. And I hope you followed all that and that all made sense. And we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.